Thank you for joining us as we explore the heritage of the YMCA. Whether you are a volunteer, a staff, a member, or participant of the Y, you are now part of a family that is truly more a movement than a company. It has made an impact on this world like few organizations in history. Few things stand the test of time. Not many organizations may have a profound impact on multiple generations, but yours does. This heritage, your heritage, is so much more than historical facts. This heritage will draw you into the fabric of the Y. You will discover the heartbeat of this movement and gain understanding as to how it has stood the test of time. It is true, there is no power greater than an idea whose time has come. There are few examples that demonstrate this truth more than the idea that gave birth to the YMCA. What was that idea? What sparked the beginnings of your Y? The spark was God tapping on the shoulder of a young 20-year-old man, George Williams. From George Williams' heart for people and a passion for his community, the YMCA began in 1844. One of 9 children, George failed in the family business. He was a terrible farmer, but what he lacked in agricultural ability, he made up for in leadership and vision. George Williams was the chief instigator, along with 11 other young men who worked in a dry goods firm in downtown London, where many of them not only worked, but also lived. It was the start of the Industrial Revolution, and London was the center of the world. The working conditions were difficult and unbearable in some cases. George and his friends were compelled to meet. Their employer donated a room so they could gather for prayer, study, and fellowship. On June 6, 1844, George and his friends decided to form an association and penned it the Young Men's Christian Association. The YMCA was born out of these humble beginnings, and as well as a spiritual thirst for Jesus Christ and their desire to give away what they had found. Men were coming to London from all over Europe to work in the world's first factories. There was little infrastructure to welcome the influx of men. George and his small group of activists felt a deep conviction that it was up to them to offer their community alternatives to the unsavory downtown options that tempted many young men. The Y quickly became a bright light in a dark city, and that was just the beginning. Only 11 years after its birth, in 1855, there were 397 separate Ys in 9 nations, impacting 30,369 people. Young men with spiritual encouragement and positive relationships. The United States of America is one of those nations. In 1851, the YMCA traveled across the Atlantic. Sea Captain Thomas Sullivan established the first YMCA of the United States in Boston. By 1860, there were 205 separate YMCAs throughout America with 25,000 members. Of the beginnings, George Williams simply said, the purpose in organizing was to extend God's grace to young men so they could feel the warmth and glow that is ours. George and his band of brothers were not starting an organization. They were organizing a mission. They were so motivated by their love for God and so moved by their compassion for others. They started a movement that became infectious to the world and has changed it forever. George Williams and his friends responded to the needs of the young men in downtown London. Taking social responsibility for others became a defining characteristic of the YMCA. The Y has and continues to take social responsibility. Let's take a look at how the YMCA responded to the needs of its time within its first 100 years. Here's Travis to tell us more.
In 1861, just 6 years after the start of the first YMCA in the United States, Civil War broke out. At Fort Sumter, the YMCA organized an effort to work together in the aid of the soldiers. The YMCA then, as it is characteristic now, found it more important to serve all people than to take a political stand that would divide their efforts of serving people. Therefore, the soldiers of the North and the soldiers of the South were served. During the 4 years of the Civil War, the YMCA supervised 5,000 volunteers who served soldiers, raised over $6 million, handed out over 1.5 million Bibles, held over 80,000 prayer meetings, and took food and coffee to the front lines of the battle. Someone noted, "There's a good deal of religion in a warm shirt and a good beefsteak." I invite you to hear more about the YMCA war relief efforts that gave birth to the military YMCAs throughout the United States as well as the USO.
The Y's work in the Civil War marked the beginning of its tradition of service on the battlefield. As soon as America entered World War I, the YMCA again leapt into action. At the time, the General Secretary of the National YMCA, John R. Mott, was an advisor to President Woodrow Wilson, who often looked to him for advice on international matters. On April 6, 1917, the very day the U.S. declared war, Mott sent a telegram to Wilson offering the full service of the YMCA. The Y's relief work would come to include everything from serving hot cocoa to soldiers to raising money for much-needed supplies.
The YMCA launches a fundraising drive under Mott's leadership, which eventually garners $200 million, more than $200 million.
Nearly 26,000 YMCA workers ran 1,500 canteens for the boys overseas, as well as 4,000 temporary huts for recreation and religious services. The Y volunteers, many of whom were women, coordinated massive shipments of preserves, socks, and even baseball bats. And when German U-boats made shipping goods across the Atlantic too risky, the Y built factories in Europe, including 44 cookie and candy plants to supply soldiers with sweets. But the Y's efforts were not without their critics. Unlike other relief groups, the Y charged soldiers for cigarettes, a fact that led to accusations of war profiteering. The Y's response was that they were simply trying to cover the enormous costs of their wide-ranging relief efforts, and that any money left over went into an educational fund for returning troops, the forerunner, it would turn out, of the GI Bill. Some soldiers also complained that the Y was mixing its religious mission with its relief mission.
The troops accused YMCA secretaries of trying to keep us from wine, women, and song. The YMCA, in the words of one leader, wanted to prevent World War I from becoming a venereal, disease-ridden festival.
Criticism of the Y led not just to changes in its war relief efforts, but to changes in the Y itself.
World War I has a very secularizing effect on the YMCA. They start out the war trying hard to win converts to Christ. By the end of the war, they're no longer doing that. And after the war, this continues.
Indeed, in 1933, the YMCA would officially abandon its Protestant evangelical mission. With the outbreak of World War II, the Y would once again send its volunteers to the front lines. Along with other volunteer groups, it helped found the United Service Organizations for War Relief Work, better known as the USO. The Y's humanitarian efforts in World War II would serve 6 million servicemen in more than 36 countries. And in 1946, YMCA General Secretary John Mott would be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. But the Y wasn't just working overseas. Its wartime assistance was also needed on the American home front. Sometimes even Y volunteers themselves were among those in need.
As you just heard, the action taken by the YMCA to meet the needs of our military men and women significantly defined the YMCA and shaped world history. Presidents of our country depended upon and commissioned the Y to play a critical role. Wartime is not the only situation the YMCA has responded to. They demonstrated social responsibility when serving men in mining communities and lumber camps, or out in the middle of nowhere while they built railroads that stretched across this country. The YMCA went to the people and they met the need. For decades, the Y served men only, but as times changed, so did the Y. Well before it was socially acceptable, the Y included women in its programs. Well before the civil rights movement gained historical momentum, the Y was serving minorities. Permission was granted to the people of various races to start YMCAs to serve their people. YMCAs were segregated, reflecting the times, but were encouraged and supported as a whole. In 1853, Anthony Bowen, as a freed slave, began the first colored YMCA. In the same year, a YMCA serving an Asian population began in San Francisco. You could find on the plains of South Dakota Sitting Bull and 4 generations of his family participating in the YMCA. In the early days of the Y, the value of inclusivity was woven deeply into the fabric of the movement, valuing leadership and participation from all people. Responding to social needs and the participation of all still powerfully defines the YMCA culture. Let's take a look at another defining focus the YMCA has discovered along its journey. Here's Janelle to tell the story.
The YMCA movement not only responded to the needs of young men, many who were immigrants to America, the YMCA also discovered their role in developing young boys. It became obvious that building boys was easier than mending broken men. To illustrate the impact of the youth development work in the Y, let's delve into Martin Luther King Jr.'s story. Martin Luther King Jr. grew up in the Y, and he used the Y as an advocate and a safe haven throughout the civil rights movement. Listen with me as we hear from Andrew Young, a critical civil rights leader and a friend of Dr. King.
As a civil rights crusader, U.S. Congressman, Ambassador to the United Nations, and 2-term Mayor of Atlanta, Andrew Young has helped shape modern American history. And the YMCA helped shape Andrew Young.
The way we used to play football was just about as rough as anything I did, any beating I got in the civil rights movement.
As a child growing up in New Orleans, Young spent much of his time at the Dryads YMCA. There were no playgrounds in his neighborhood, no public resources at all for young black children.
When I went to the Y, it was like going to heaven. I learned to play table tennis, shoot pool, swim, play basketball, run, read, speak, almost everything, cuss, clown. The YMCA was a great character developer.
His experience was a common one, the product of an America where segregation created terrible racial inequalities, while at the same time nurturing a powerful sense of African-American community.
But the Y, even though it was a segregated Y, inside the walls of that Y, all men were created equal. And you had to respect everybody. You got a chance to compete with everybody.
Like Andrew Young, Martin Luther King Jr. and many other civil rights leaders spent their early years at black YMCAs and Y camps throughout the South. Ironically, these segregated Ys helped nurture the movement that would destroy legal segregation, transforming America and the Y itself in the process.
A new philosophy was born of the Negro struggle.
From its inception, the YMCA reflected the problems and paradoxes of race in America. Denied access to white institutions, black Americans were forced to create their own, including YMCAs. The first of these so-called colored Ys was established in 1853 by Anthony Bowen, a former slave in Washington, D.C.
These very early YMCA efforts by African Americans, even the ones that emerged in the aftermath of the Civil War, some of those were very short-lived. They consisted of gatherings in the living rooms, maybe of one individual.
It wasn't until 1890 that the YMCA hired its first secretary in charge of colored work, 27-year-old William Hunton. Though the colored Ys remained separate and unequal, Hunton and his associate, Jesse Moreland, invigorated the Y's role in African-American communities around the country.
You could say anything in the Y. Speech was not censored in the Y. People could meet black and white together in the Y.
In the early years of the civil rights movement, black Ys sometimes played host to planning sessions for sit-ins and other protests. But as black churches took the lead in the fight against segregation, the black Ys faded into the background.
The Y was sort of a hidden hand. The Y never made pronouncements. The Y didn't lead marches, but everybody who led the marches was trained in the Y.
For Andrew Young and other black leaders, the Y remained a safe haven in a tumultuous era.
That was our our family time. Whenever we were home together, one of the things that Dr. King would always suggest is, why don't we go to the Y for a family night swim?
It would take more than a decade of struggle, but as landmarks like the Civil Rights Act became law, segregation gradually fell by the wayside. By the mid-60s, the social revolution the Y helped nurture finally forced the Y itself to change. In 1967, after more than a century of tacitly accepted racial separation, the National Board formally banned discrimination on the basis of race.
As one just witnessed, the YMCA profoundly influenced the development of our civil rights leaders. The Y has sought to build up youth of America generation after generation and continues to be the largest organization that develops youth worldwide. There are countless examples of youth being shaped, inspired, and challenged by the YMCA. Let me just name a few. We helped to launch Boy Scouts of America. Campfire Girls began in 1910 as a YMCA program. The first parent-child programming developed in 1926 with Indian guides, now known as adventure guides. The idea of organized group camping was discovered and nurtured by the YMCA. Camp Dudley in Upper State New York was our first camp established in 1885. It, along with 264 other camps each year, still developed thousands of youth throughout the United States. In the 1960s, American society began to see a shift in the workforce. As many mothers joined the workforce, parents were desperately searching for nurturing and safe places for their children to be before and after school. The YMCA once again responded to this need and saw this as a great opportunity to develop youth by becoming the largest child care provider in the nation, which is still true today. This passion for young people has evolved into an ongoing commitment to provide youth development within the inner cities, suburbs, and rural parts of America. The YMCA has taken responsibility for numerous social needs and developed youth since its origin. Now here is Heather to introduce to you another cause the Y has been committed to throughout its history.
The triangle shape of our Y logo is intentional. The branding of the YMCA over time represents an ongoing commitment to help our members build health, spiritually, mentally, and physically. We know and believe health is not just about our physical body. We experience every day the effects and interactions between our mind, our spirit, and our body. We know learning to build healthy habits in spirit, mind, and body is critical to our overall health. This concept is nothing new. Men and women of the Y have been talking this way for decades. Luther Gulick originally created the triangle as an emblem reminder of what the Y stands for. In fact, 100 years ago, within the very spiritually focused organization, Gulick had to fight to get people to understand the importance of exercise and physical health. Today, most of us understand the importance of physical health, but we often need to be reminded. To nurture our well-being includes the intentional feeding and fueling of our minds and spirits. But imagine, if you will, grown men with mustaches learning to play newly invented sports at their local Y. Sports that no one had ever heard of. Sports like volleyball, racquetball, and softball for women. Even basketball was invented within the walls of the local Y. The early days of basketball were not what you think of today. The sport started using peach baskets. Soon they thought to cut the bottoms out of the baskets so they didn't need a ladder to retrieve the ball. Later, they ran into trouble when spectators on the track above the court started blocking players' shots. Hence, the invention of the backboard. James Naismith, a Y professional, was challenged by his boss to create an indoor game that would foster Christian character, teamwork, utilize strategic thinking, and be fun for young men. Now the Naismith Trophy is given every year to the champion of the NCAA tournament. Today, thousands of people report they learned to swim at the YMCA. This all began in 1885 with the world's first indoor pool, built in the Brooklyn, New York YMCA. Mass swimming lessons began in 1907 in Detroit, and finally in 1910 the first indoor filtered pool was invented and installed in Kansas City. Just imagine what it might have been like to swim in an unfiltered pool. Or maybe you'd rather not. The Y has always been a place where need and opportunity is met with creative and innovation and courage. The Y story and mission live on today. Here is Mark to give us a perspective on our mission and invite us to shape this generation's legacy of the YMCA.
Across the United States, we embrace a mission that has been adapted from previous generations. It maintains the integrity of where we come from, and it speaks to where we're going and whom we invite to join us. The mission is this: to put Christian principles into practice through programs that build healthy spirit, mind, and body for all. To be a member, in fact, to be a staff member of the Y, you do not have to call yourself a Christian. Yet you do need to understand where the Y comes from, what we're committed to, and how we go about doing it. After all, the Y is much bigger than you or me. It is much larger than your branch or our association. There are over 14,000 expressions of the YMCA around the world. There are over 2,600 just in the United States. Leaders of this organization have counseled presidents and won Nobel Peace Prizes and rallied thousands to action. You are now part of their company, you are part of their family, and part of the movement. At the 50th birthday of the YMCA, George Williams addresses those gathered, encouraging them to carry the torch of this movement. As you listen, take in what the founder is asking you to do.
And here now is the actual voice of Sir George Williams, recorded in 1894.
Manhood of America is a gift to the world. How important that it should be definitely and decidedly on the side of truth and right. Cherish the desire to be useful to young men individually by leading them foot at the call. Remember how potent will be the influence of your personal example. Your privileges are great. You committed to labor so important, so hopeful and promising as this. From the bottom of my heart, I pray that you, with all who have been or may yet be students, training school, that you mightily own the cross. Lord, both Lord.
Thank you for joining this movement that over time has brought hope, health, and life to millions of people. It continues to serve 17.9 million people per year in the U.S. alone, of which 9 million are children. What sparked the beginning of the YMCA? How has the Y stood the test of time? What has been the Y's footprint on America, on the world? How will you contribute to the YMCA's legacy of tomorrow? We are counting on you to help shape the future of the YMCA. It's an honor, it's a privilege, and it will be a lot of fun.